Charisma as a whole can be taught, but that's not the real thing you should learn. What you should really learn is to understand how people are driven forward. What are their motives? What are the big ideas that propel them into a forward momentum that is unstoppable? And ultimately, those things rest in the 7 essential stories.
All right, everybody worldwide, you're now tuned into Motivation and Confidence, where we help you do your daily best. And I'm your host, Tom Danger.
My name is Kurian Tharakan. So the book that I've written is called The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell. And it's all about understanding, not charisma necessarily, but understanding the tool set that charismatic leaders use to get people moving forward and impel them, compel them, infuse them with passion and drive to go to a common destination. And that tool set is something that anyone can master, and that is the 7 essential stories.
So with that being said, I've had several managers, several bosses that were not great storytellers. They were not charismatic. Are you saying that you've basically created a blueprint for the individual who may be flat and dry or somewhat of an introvert to give them a framework to become more engaging when they're speaking to the team?
Yes, you know what I'm going to say is that charisma as a whole can be taught, but that's not the real thing you should learn. What you should really learn is to understand how people are driven forward. What are their motives? What are the big ideas that propel them into a forward momentum that is unstoppable? And ultimately, those things rest in the 7 essential stories. So while not everybody can be a charismatic leader, anyone can learn the 7 essential stories that charismatic leaders tell. And this is charismatic leaders throughout history, whether that be Gandhi or whether that be with Theodore Roosevelt or Steve Jobs. And you can go into ancient history as well. Jesus Christ would have used these 7 essential stories, right, to really infuse that drive and passion in the people.
Got you. So what inspired you to write the book?
Well, I'm a sales and marketing strategy consultant. I work with numerous startups. Over the last 30 years, I've worked with a lot of companies. And what I've absolutely understood is that the vast majority of them are experts, absolute experts in the technology behind their startup. So they're experts in the product, experts in the science behind it. I work with a lot of startups out of the university, for example, but they're not experts in understanding what markets are ready to buy. And what I often say is most people can tell me what they're selling, but very few can tell me why customers are buying. And that's about understanding the deep motives that propel their customers to action. And once you understand those deep motives, you can then create a story set that is naturally magnetic to them and draws them in to fully understand your product and what it can do to get them to the destination that they want.
Okay, can you give us an example of a product and how you would assess what the motives are and then, how that story is created?
Well, I think the most classic story I can think of here is the iPod. When the iPod first came out, it came out into a very densely crowded MP3 player market. Everybody had an MP3 player out there. But the iPod went a whole step further. And ultimately, it was probably summed up by this one statement, 10,000 tunes in your pocket. But they actually married that, not only the MP3 player, but with the real secret sauce of iTunes, where you could buy everything, buy the 99-cent tune, organize it into a library, and then play it anywhere on your iPod. And that became a seamless process. So 10,000 tunes. A lot of people had that kind of capability in their MP3 player before, but the real magic came about when you married all of these things together. Now, I'm old enough to remember we're going down to Sam the Record Man, and you're comparable in the U.S. might be Tower Records or something like that, right? And absolutely. Flipping through all these $8.99 records, looking for that one track, and I had to pay $8.99. That was 25 years ago,
right.
And to pay for one track. And when CDs came out, you're paying $22 for CD for that one track. Well, all of that went away with the big idea of the iPod. And it was all these stories together, and people, stood in line for blocks to get a hold of one of these things. And that's the power of a great story. Now, stories, this is the other big revelation that I've had, and that is that while every organization has leaders, or a leader or leaders, plural, the real leader in an organization is the story. Now, the story and the leader orbit each other in a dual star type of system, right? They orbit each other. But imagine it this way. A great leader with a poor story actually becomes a poor leader. But even a mediocre leader with a great story has the opportunity to become a great leader. So great leaders really need great stories. And even mediocre leaders have the ability to transform themselves into something great with the power of a beautifully great story.
So give us the secret sauce. What's in the book? I mean, tell us what needs to happen for people to achieve this level of success.
The ultimate thing is that you have to understand the organizations. Now, organizations ultimately are people, and people bond together. They come together in culture. And you hear lots of people talking about culture these days. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is that prior to about 5 years ago, I could not give you a succinct definition of culture. And so I knew I had to do something to be able to transport this into the minds of my entrepreneur startup clients. And so the definition of culture is not the ping pong table or the Thursday afternoon keggers. Those are outputs of culture, and they're poor outputs of culture. They're very mediocre examples of what culture is. Culture can ultimately be summed up as the way we do things around here. It can be summed up on things like, what is rewarded, what is punished. But ultimately, culture is defined as the always on operating system that rewards or punishes behavior, that guides behavior, even when no one is looking. So your people are doing the right thing because they bought into the culture. So the first half of the book is all about the 7 pillars of culture. And the 7 pillars of culture, I'll just rattle them off for you here. 7 pillars are things like social organization. How many levels are there? Is it a flat organization, or are there 2 or 3 or more levels in the company? I always know that company's in trouble when there's more VPs than there are, actual operating line personnel, right? And that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's always an interesting dilemma that I see people getting themselves into, rewarding titles out, handing titles out, nonchalantly. But social organization. Second one is language and writing. Now, every organization will have its own vernacular, special words that they will use. That signals who's in and who's out, and really conveys a very big concept into very succinct words. For example, in the old days, I used to sell IBM PC-AT computers, which was an 286 processor, right? 20 megabyte hard drives, wow. and 640K of RAM. Well, in the old days of selling computers, we didn't talk about, we didn't talk about how much RAM there was. We would say how many K was in the computer, how much K. And of course, that's short for kilobyte. Right. And 640K was a lot of kilobytes at that time. But that signals that I'm part of the in crowd there. And if you're part of the in crowd, you might be able to be trusted, which is a good part of that culture. Third pillar of culture, religion. Now, religion is not about worshiping the boss. I hope you're not an organization where the boss needs to be worshiped, but it's rather worshiping the highest ideals and values of your organization. So what is the things that absolutely are sacred? They must never be violated. Something like, for example, with FedEx, it's absolutely, positively overnight. And you have all sorts of hero stories of people renting choppers to get the package the last mile, to do it. And they knew they wouldn't be punished for that behavior because it fulfilled the mission. But that's one of the highest ideals and values of that organization. Pillar 4 is forms of government. How are decisions made? Is it group consensus, or does one person make that decision for everybody? And it's an autocracy. It's a tyrant-controlled organization. Or is it more democratic? And and neither of those things are, good or bad. It simply, does everybody know how these things work? Pillar number five is economic systems. How do we create value? What is the value we create? Where are we in the part of the larger ecosystem? What role do we play? So if you're a steel manufacturer, you have a crucial role to play in the manufacture of tanks and cars, right? But you're just perhaps the steel manufacturer. But without that steel manufacturing industry located closely, in fact, there's a whole trend right now to reshore steel manufacturing back to the U.S. in order to keep that strategic advantage. If there's ever a need for a military action, for example, you don't want to have to wait for that steel shipment to arrive in order to make the planes and the tanks. So what is the economic system? Number 6 is the arts. And the arts is simply, can you take your most basic widget and lift it to the level of an art form? So when the iPhone came in into a very crowded field, just like the iPod, of phones. They were all brick phones, many with the name Nokia on it, right? They're very clunky type phones. And now you have this sleek, super designed, just aesthetically, lustfully pleasing product. And everybody wanted one. Again, lining up for blocks because Apple had lifted the phone to the level of an art form. And it's a completely different experience then. And the final thing is the 7th pillar is customs and tradition. And customs and tradition are ways to instill the ongoing 6 pillars in a regular form. So customs might be the Christmas holiday party, for example, the Friday morning coffee clutch, the regular trot to lunch, with the client on Tuesday afternoons. Everybody's expected to do that kind of thing. Now, those 7 pillars create the operating system that guides behavior, even when no one is around to reward or punish that behavior. Now, what happens is you take that, but how do you get it to come alive? How do you encourage people to really understand what those cultural elements mean to our organization? And that's where the 7 stories come in. And the 7 stories now infuse that culture with all of the direction and the examples and the forward-looking vision that the founders and the leaders want their people to understand. But without infusing the cultural pillars, it's sort of like if you don't understand what those cultural pillars are, these 7 stories are like a massive amount of life-giving rain dropping down on a tarp-covered dry plane. It bounces off the tarp, right? So you have to take that tarp off and make sure those 7 pillars are infused with these stories. Do you want me to tell you what the 7 stories are?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But before you go into the 7 stories, I have a question. So in developing the framework, so you have the 7 pillars, and how does a leader work with, because if you just give a person a book and they read it, it's going to be hard to implement. So how can they actually bring this into existence? What is your recommendation for bringing it to fruition?
By regularly telling stories, and the stories that you tell have to be enshrined in some kind of a document or even something as simple as a PowerPoint. Everybody hates PowerPoint these days, but it is about telling the corporate stories, right? Especially the hero stories about how somebody went and really took that pillar of culture or one of the 7 stories and lived it to its max. And then you can illustrate to everybody else, these are the kinds of values and belief systems that we want to instill in our people. That's the way you do it. And if you take a look at, mass movements, and so mass movements, you have Me Too movement, you have Black Lives Matter now, there's no one leader there. There's not one leader. There's multiple leaders, but there's a common storybook. And they have the storybooks, you have very prominent stories and you have subset stories, but all those stories go to do one thing, and that is to reflect the common values and beliefs of that organization's culture.
Got you. So now you can go into the 7 stories.
Okay, so the 7 stories, they're really simple, and these 7 stories are primal. They're primal. And in fact, these 7 stories are very much a part of religion, of all the major religions. And why religion is so great at telling these stories is because religion, especially the major ones, have been around for a very long time. And so one of the reasons that anything survives is because the story survives. So all the stories that you tell, the stories are resonant with the values and beliefs that you cherish. So here are the 7 stories that you have to tell. One is creation and origin. Where did you come from? What was the inciting incident that created the change? You know, everything was going so well, and then this happened. Well, what was that happen? Now you have to change course, and you have to correct that course in order to make sure that you survived and thrive, the organization. Story number 2 is our identity, beliefs, and values. Who are we as people? What are our highest beliefs? What are our highest values? How are they different from other organizations? And you can see that very clearly in religion, for example. Now, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, they are all Abrahamic religions. They all have their foundation in Abraham, right? And they have some very common stories. They also have some differing stories. But they also have a very common values and belief set, but perhaps different practices for actually, you know, to celebrate those things. Okay, story number 3, the big idea. What is that central organizing theme? What is that central organizing idea that brings everything together? What is it that we're trying to do? So what you have to do prior to this is to really understand either your employees or your prospects or whoever your audience's deep pain is. What is their deep pain? What are their deep passion points? Pain and passion points. So you want to get them out of pain and into the passion points. Get them out of pain, get to gain. And so the big idea is that central organizing statement that brings everything together under one big umbrella. Now, here's the thing. The very first thing you sell is not your product. Okay, and whether you're selling something to your employees to come on board, to stay with you, bring new employees on, or you want to get a prospect to buy your product, the very first thing you sell is not your product. It's the big idea.
Right.
And the big idea, you know, from the big idea, that central organizing big statement, you have a set of value propositions that help solve that pain and gain. You have some key messages to actually tell everybody about. Then you wrap that all up in the big story, the narrative. Now, here's the beauty of this. The only thing that someone buys from you is the big idea wrapped up in story. Because your products and services are only tools to fulfill the promise you made in the big story, the big idea, the big idea, right? So you made a promise. Well, this is how you are going to fulfill that promise. This is the product, this is the service set, and now you're going to get to that next level. So in a lot of ways, the storyteller is like the wizard or the good witch, you know, or you know, the wise old man that helps the young adventurer to get from point A to point B, you know, to fulfill their destiny. Story number 4. Story number 4 is the enemy we face. So the enemy doesn't have to be a physical enemy. It doesn't have to be a person. It can be something as common as a challenge. It could be global warming. That could be the enemy. It could be overfishing. It could be that we're hunting the whales to extinction. Now, what is the enemy? It can be as simple as graft, corruption. You know, what is the enemy? It doesn't have to be an individual, right? But some kind of challenge or some kind of thing to overcome. So you have to define that and why it's important that we have to overcome this. Now, here's the most seductive story of all. If you want to persuade anybody, the mighty winds. And the mighty winds is simply the story about the big macro trends that are in the environment that don't care whether you believe in them or not. They're going to create opportunities and destruction in their path. That's what's going to happen. That is just what's going to happen. So the big mighty wind, the macro trend, why I call it the mighty winds is because it's like every business is, to me, it's like a sail ship. And you have to ascertain which direction the wind is, right? And the winds are the macro trend. So, and if you don't ascertain the direction of the mighty wind, you may not be able to take advantage of its free typhoon of energy. And worse, you might actually be capsized by it. You're going in the wrong direction. So you really have to understand this. So here's a big mighty wind. And the mighty wind was the internet. The internet came about in 1969 as a military experiment by DARPA, 1969. And Blockbuster came about in the 80s. And if you remember the old Blockbuster days, going down there, renting the video cassette, and finally the DVDs and things like that, you know, they saw the mighty wind of the internet, but they didn't take advantage of it. Netflix did.
Yep.
So Netflix did, and in fact, Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix. I think it's for $1 billion, which sounds like a really, affordable price right now, because Blockbuster is no longer. They were still hanging on to the brick and mortar, and now Netflix took advantage of that free typhoon of energy and just capitalized on it. Now you have to remember, Netflix started out not as an internet company; it started out as a mail order DVD company, but they pivoted their business into the internet space because they recognize the power of the free typhoon of energy in the internet's capability to deliver high quality streaming. Okay, and all technologies improve over time. So when you tell people about the mighty winds and you show them how it's going to destroy certain industries and create other opportunities, and that your products and services or your ideas are going to help them get on the right side, not on the destruction side, but on the creation side, then that is so persuasive than anything you could tell them about, hey, just buy this because it's a great product. No, you buy this because this is going to be a perfect tool set to take advantage of the mighty wind of this macro trend. Now, those 5 stories are the left-hand side of the equation. Okay, and 5 stories are believable. There's an equal sign now, and it goes into story number 6, the journey we must undertake. So the first 5 stories, I completely believe it. What do we do with this now? And the journey we must undertake tells people we have to do this. And we're going to now, these are the destinations we're going to go towards. This is what we're going to achieve when we get there. And this is how everybody's going to participate in all of that upside. And so that journey we must undertake. The first 5 equals the journey. First 5 stories equals the journey we must undertake. And then finally, story number 7. The story number 7 is why we will win. And why we will win is a meta-narrative. It combines all the previous 6 stories into one single telling, but with the addition of what we call keystones. And what a keystone is that special sauce, that special technology, that special advantage that will absolutely allow you to win in this scenario, in this story, right? At least you have to get people to believe that they can win with this particular keystone. And there's all sorts of different keystones, superior technology, superior strategy, superior people. There's hundreds of keystones. The question is, what is the right keystone for your company? Now, here's a real simple keystone: death ground. Death ground. We have to do this. There's no other choice. Right. So in 1519, Hernan Cortez fled Cuba with 630 men to try and conquer Mexico. Now, the governor of Cuba did not want him just going out there by himself, right? The governor of Cuba wanted that glory for himself. So he didn't want Hernan taking it. Hernan knew that, so he fled. He actually mutinied. And so he took these 630 men, and he landed on the shores of Veracruz. Behind him was Diego Velazquez, the governor of Cuba, who was going to probably hang him and all his men if he caught him, right? Because they had mutinied. And in front of him was the vast, huge Aztec empire. And there was millions of people, hundreds of thousands of kilometers of square kilometers of area, and no one knew how to do this. 630 men against millions of Aztecs.
Right.
What ended up happening is that Cortez not only scuttled some of his ships, right? So he created that death ground, so there was no turning back anyways. But he basically pointed out to his men, either we do this or we all die, one way or the other. 2 years later, in 1521, the entirety of the Aztec Empire fell to its feet. Okay, so Cortez conquered the entire Aztec Empire in 2 years. The 630 men plus their allied Indian force, and they had the help of some European, viral diseases as well that laid devastation. Right. So it's not a pretty story whatsoever, but it is a story that shows that he inspired his people with that keystone of Death Ground, and to do an amazing thing. Absolutely amazing. It wasn't a pretty thing. It wasn't a kind thing. But it was absolutely amazing.
Well, that's very interesting. So I also see here, my question to you is, of all the stories that you've heard, and that was an amazing story, what story is your personal favorite and what does it mean to you?
But the entire book, is not about the stories like Hernan Cortez. It's about showing you a method to create your own stories, then illustrating it with things like Hernan Cortez. But there's a fascinating story in there, in the chapter on economics, about the world's oldest recorded customer complaint letter from 3,750 years ago on a clay tablet.
Really?
Absolutely correct. So they were doing an excavation in Ur, which is in modern day Iraq, in ancient Mesopotamia, right? The city of Ur. And they found this clay tablet. It was translated, and it was a letter from a merchant by the name of E. Nasser. And it was a letter from a merchant by the name of Nani to a copper provider in the Persian Gulf by the name of E. Nasser. And the clay tablet, if you read it, it reads exactly like a customer complaint letter that you would send to Amazon customer service at midnight. And, I can't believe you sold me these substandard goods. I sent my people down to get my money back. You turned them away. I've never been treated this shoddily before. Who do you think I am? I will never take any more of your copper ingots unless I personally inspect them in my yard, and on it goes like that. Now, what's interesting is this. Today, you and I can write off that letter and probably fire it off in 5 minutes. Right. And, we email it off to Amazon customer service or whoever it is, whoever we're not very happy with. Our friend Nani, you got to remember this is 3,750 years ago, like 1750 BCE, right? Oh, yeah. 3,750 years ago. So Nani had to go down to the brickyard, the clay tablet yard, dictate his grievance to one of the scribes down there, who would inscribe the complaint letter on a wet clay tablet. It was then baked to harden, and then it was couriered through enemy territory to E. Nasser. So we know Nani was quite upset because he wouldn't have gone through all that trouble, if it hadn't been something that was really important to him. So, but what struck me when I found this letter was that how things simply have not changed very much. Substandard goods, shoddy treatment, bad customer service, all that kind of stuff. It's been with us from the dawn of time.
Wow. So the number one reason companies and organizations fail.
The number one reason organizations and companies fail is their stories fail. That is the number one reason. Their stories cease to have relevance to the marketplace. And it's not about the products that are, irrelevant. The products are a result of the story. So you tell a story and say, we want to build these kinds of products. And the products are several iterations away. So this idea of Nokia, for example, being a leader in the smartphone, not the smartphone, but in the mobile phone market, BlackBerry was the leader in the smartphone market. Well, both those stories failed at some point in time. That's what ended up happening. BlackBerry is in the business of creating operating systems now for smart car systems, autonomous car systems, things like that. That's what BlackBerry is doing now. Nokia was sold to Microsoft, and then Microsoft had to write down their investment when the story continued to fail, right? And so when stories fail, your products won't save you because your products are a direct manifestation of the stories you're trying to tell. So if you want to get your product, if you want to get your company enlivened and moving forward, you have to continually renew the story to be on trend, current with the time. You'll see this in religion, for example. There's a lot of pressure on the Catholic Church to modernize, to stay current with the way people live today. And so that's everything from birth control to women priests, all sorts of different things. And regardless of, what side of the belief system you're on, that's going to pose a significant number of challenges for the Catholic Church in order to stay relevant to future generations of people.
Wow. Lastly, what's your favorite comfort food?
Favorite comfort food? Wow. What is my favorite? I honestly don't. I haven't thought of that one. What is my favorite comfort food? Ice cream. And I had to think about that for a second, right? And I deliberately don't keep it around the house very often because I'd be comforting myself way more often than I needed to, right? But I like vanilla ice cream. I am that plain Jane. That's all I can tell you.
Nothing wrong with that. So where can people check out the book?
So if you want to check out the book, all you have to do is come to the site, strategypeak.com. Okay. And there's a little section to the right that is going to be a download of a couple of free chapters. But here's what I'm going to do for you, Tom. I'm going to set up a free landing page for you. It's going to be strategypeak.com/danger.
Okay.
Okay, /danger. And the first 5 people to register on that, just give me your email address. I promise I won't spam you.
Oh, right? Don't worry.
Just a real simple, simple 2-step form, and I'll send you a copy of the book just for listening.
Cool.
Thank you for tuning into Motivation and Confidence, where we help you do your daily best. Like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Check us out on various platforms: Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Overcast, Castbox, SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, TuneIn, or Alexa Media.